drunk beer with. Now I was an officer. I was commanding them. Now, the military manuals say you should never become too friendly with your, now this is in training, and this is true too, it's got to be that way, with enlisted men. But here were enlisted men that, Christ, I've been out dancing, you know, raising hell with, drinking, skiing with, and all of a sudden they're in my unit. Now you have to be careful how to handle that situation, because this is in the military, but it was a civilian outfit. Do you understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. We weren't regular Army people. Oh yes, it was some regular Army officers in there. But we were all civilians. We were all in it together. We saw how the military operates. We accepted taking orders. We accepted doing these things. But we were all civilians. When the war was over, we wanted to get out. We weren't professional. Oh yes, some stayed in, but you understand what I mean? The military in those days was a civilian outfit throughout it, and we accepted military discipline. But some officers were so disciplinarian, you understand, under the conditions. We were educated enough, truly an educational thing, college people, we understood the need for authority, and they understood the need for orders to make a team. But you know, some of this regular Army stuff was a little bit heavy in certain occasions, and that's why certain people got nicknames behind their back, which everybody did. Everybody gets one, favorable or unfavorable. So when you get into the depth of these things, as I'm trying to explain, it can be a little bit iffy. He was a disciplinarian. That would be accepted by even some of the people that I know that didn't like him. And that's agreeable to everybody that was in the 10th, and that's agreeable also to the professional, from the professional military approach. That's acceptable to them.
Well, let's move on and think about what your role was during the March offensive.
Well, I think my main role was to keep in contact. I can't give you the numbers of times that I went there up front. In the later offensive, I was sent out about 4 in the afternoon to locate an element of the division moved so fast, the troops did, in obtaining in the accomplishment of their mission, that they outstripped communication. And the general didn't know that one time I was sent out. He never sent me personally. My boss, who was the G3 of the division, he was a full colonel, and Jeff Irwin, a West Point graduate, said, Litchfield, we've lost contact. I don't know where this outfit is, and the general is bugging me about it, and you got to go out and find them. So I went off of my drive at 4 o'clock one night. I traveled all night on roads that I couldn't see, I didn't know, and I finally located where this outfit was. And they got my head shot off in one of the deals, but anyway, the point I'm making, I finally located them and delivered the orders that when I were given to give him at 4 o'clock in the morning. And then I spent the rest, since the division CP had moved before I returned, I had to locate the division CP. All I'm saying is, it's interesting now for me to look at television and to have those people that are embedded over there keep asking these questions about military plans. It is so true. There has to be a plan of attack. But just as sure as God made little green apples, the minute the attack happens, the plan, sure, you've got to obtain your objective, but the means to get there changes so fast that you don't even recognize what you heard before. So you have to adapt.
Tell me about the circumstance.
See, so you adapt, he said, "You've got to locate, what the hell was that? It was Durrett Townsend. Durrett Townsend, the 2nd Battalion commander. He didn't know where he was. He had no communication backwards either, because he advanced so far. So the point I'm making, that I had to locate him so the general knew what the heck he was going to do from that point on. You got to know what people you got to deal with, what units, and where the hell they are. So that's the whole thing about it, and that's what the other liaison officers had to do from time to time.
What happened to you that you almost got your head blown off?
Well, I'm traveling on the road in a Jeep, one night I was called a halt, and so we halted, when you're called a halt, and so forth, and so I had to give the password. And with that, I gave the password, and at the same time, a tank had been sitting in the ditch on this road, and a searchlight came on and, blinded us. And he saw me, and he caught my rank on my shoulders, and he says, "Lieutenant, I goddamn near blew your head off." He says, "I've had you in my sights for 100 yards down the road." So I went, "Ooh." Well, wandering around at night in territory that you don't know the roads, up front, because you go up there occasionally, and you're not over them. Besides, none of the troops know the roads. In combat, an infantryman in combat, his world is about as big as 10 yards to his left and right. He's walked up a road, but if you ask him, what road was it? He doesn't know. It's a road. But in other words, that's as big as the world is. And I understand that in front. That's right. So you're wandering around at night in the road. You don't know when you bump into people, when they're friend or enemy at night, you can't see them. So you go through that mental experience, and you also go through other things. We had a little firefight coming back because a lot of troops had been bypassed. Our advance had been so fast. We ignored certain troops and went right by them. So they were all around us, behind us.
Surrounded.
Well, yes, they would surround us, not in the sense of we were at a disadvantage. They had been bypassed, and they were disassociated from their units too. Little bands, 8 or 10 people over here, and 8 or 10, 9 or 10 over there, and all disorganized, but surrounded in the sense they were all around us, but not surrounding us in the sense that we were about to suffer casualties because of that. They didn't know where we were either, in one sense. In other words, it was then the route began even at that point.
Now, think back to March Offensive and tell me more about what you observed in your role during March Offensive.
Well, in the first place, the rapidity was terrific. The speed of advance was something else. They suffered a lot of casualties the first 2 or 3 days. The division did, but they kept going. And I think in about 6 or 8 days, they broke out started coming downhill into the Po Valley, and I would think that it was just due to their will, but to their physical condition and their morale to keep them going. It's unbelievable how fast they moved.
Are you on
Christ,
April offensive right now?
There were generals coming up, that didn't realize how much had been accomplished. And at one point, the general was asked not to advance any further until somebody else caught up with him. So that is typical of what the hell happened. That's typical of crossing the Po River. We were so far advanced then that General Truscott came up He said, you can't cross the river now. I have no protection for you once you get across. You got to wait for this other outfit to come up. The general says, we ain't going to wait. They argued just like, there wasn't any rank between them, even though Truscott was his commander. When you see those things you see as a junior officer, and operating at the level I'm in, a captain is a junior officer. And gee, they're all lieutenant colonels, and generals. So, what's a captain? That's so you listen to these guys, chew on each other just like two business execs that differ. It's interesting to see it when you're involved in something like that.
I take it that General Hayes did not hold back any of his ideas on how they should proceed?
No, because he was always right. And what's his name knew was right.
How did he convince General Truscott that he should proceed?
Mainly because he said, we've got them on the run, and the directive Truscott was operating under, which I later found out, was that we should by all means get to the passes into what was to be the German redoubt in the Austrian area and block them off. And the idea was to get there before the Krauts got there. So on that theory, on that basis alone, he was able to persuade them. And the politics. Here's the politics coming in. The general persuaded Truscott to bring up all the watercraft that had been accumulated across the Po, that had been stashed in the rear, waiting for the other division on the right, I think it was the 85th, to cross. And he persuaded him to bring and let the 10th be first, which did happen. I was there in the room pretty much. The general moved to CP, and I was in that CP, pretty close to the banks of the Po, and you could hear the artillery shells passing overhead. That's how close we were to the troops in behind. But the interesting thing is, I remember that heated conversation, and the politics of the situation you see occurs in the military. Like some general would like this outfit to be the first to cross the Po, the first to do this, the first to capture Rome. And of course the division went through that when it was assigned over on the Yugoslav border, because we were placed under British command. 8th Army Command was a British Army in Italy. And the reason we were over there, of course, is because Churchill didn't want Marshal Tito to annex any more territory. And he wanted also to have American and British troops in that area to keep the Russians from coming down through the Balkans into it. So you see all of this stuff gets to play at a fairly local level, local being where the troops are fighting. There's a reason for troop assignment on that basis.
When you were in Yugoslavia, did you have a sense that it was a pretty fluid and a pretty tense situation?
Well, the partisans, of course, were wild ones, just like the Italian partisans were, which did a lot of help, gave a lot of help to us, the American troops in Italy, capturing Germans and interrogating them, and providing detailed information about where Germans were located, buildings they were staying in. And this was somewhat true of the Yugoslav partisans. But many of them were bands of soldiers, partisans in one sense, but bands of soldiers from Tito's troops. And we had to be very careful not to antagonize them and so forth. Our main job was to patrol the borders, be ready to attack if necessary. Therefore, patrolling had to be constant to understand where the enemy troops were, or possible enemy action would be. And assignments had to be made about units to combat, to go into action if needed. Therefore, they had to look at maps and establish objectives and so forth. All of that preparatory to any action along the border, all the way up into Yugoslavia, Slovakia, I think, meets Austria.
Did you have a sense that the local civilians were happy to have the 10th there?
Well, the Italians were. I don't know how necessarily how the Yugoslav people felt. Because all the way over to Trieste, that was all Italy and so forth. So the Italians were all very happy. Obviously, you know that since you've been to Italy and you understand the.
Well, I know it's a little more complex up along the border because there was more factions, people hoping the fascists would come back into power. There's obviously still sort of Paisan. There's more people in play in the balance of power. Did you have a sense that there was more factions?
No, at my level, I didn't have a sense. Yeah, I see the nature of your question. No, I didn't. I would say at that point, as far as my personal participation was in liaison, still with the 86, was to make sure that the general knew where people were, the units were, and whether they were adequately preparing for any attack or any operation and so forth. That was what so I was traveling back and forth from different battalion headquarters and so on. In other words, personally, the reason that I know about some of these things is overhearing conversation between higher ranking officers because I happen to be in the same office with them, same room with them. You know, I didn't experience any meetings with British generals and having them tell me about things that they'd been ordered to do. That was way above me. But as I look back on these things and listening to the talk of U.S. officers that I've been concerned with in their jobs, and since they attended meetings that I didn't attend, some of these officers that were on the front line had to report to British officers too. That's where my information comes on the matter of, except for one circumstance, I must say. The division at one time, spent 3 weeks to a month not very active. There were certain units were called into the line, the rest of them were back getting ready for the spring offensive. And rest R&R work too. I was sent back for a full month to the theater headquarters in the Caserta, the old Italian King's Summer Palace. And there, Field Marshal
Alexander?
The British officer, Alexander, was the overall commander. I worked in the G3 office there for a month. So I was in possession of all the units in the theater. I was in the possession of, no matter where they came from, no matter what branch of the service, Air Force, Navy, everything that he had there in maps showing where they were. And I knew the operation plan for the whole whole spring offensive, which included all units in the theater. So that's where I got my information about what was happening politically, because they all knew it. Because, of course, Churchill was running the show from the politics and the more. He was commander-in-chief of the British stuff. So that was a very interesting experience. You might say I had some good training on what we're talking about, some good experiences.
Because you certainly had a much bigger picture of how the 10th fit in to the whole Corps, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes, I did. It's interesting, the employment, because one can wonder as to why it didn't happen before. That is the employment of the 10th. We were available and probably properly trained after a year and a half, but that didn't happen. I don't, why it didn't happen, I don't know. You can read about people's opinions. But it finally did happen, and it's interesting to see sometimes military psychology that is employed on the ground. And it failed. The Brazilian Expeditionary Force tried to capture Belvedere at one time, 2 or 3 times. And then an American force, 34th Division tried to capture it. And it's like Casino. They wasted more time trying to capture, and all the time the Krauts were up on the types looking down. And they were up on top of Belvedere looking down. They were up on top of River Ridge looking down. How in hell you think that a human being is going to climb up against that, in daylight? You just throw lives away. But this is what was done. But eventually the 10th, and that's the reason for the night attack. No way we could have gotten up that ridge. He'd have lost the whole battalion. He'd lost 1,000 men, easy, going up that ridge in daylight.
When you spent that month,
so what I'm saying is, yeah. That's it, 5 o'clock. No, I don't mean to kick you out. I meant that's the end of the line of the striking.
Oh, the striking. When you think about that month you spent over with Alexander, what was the sense that you had there about their estimation of the 10th Mountain Division and their capabilities?
Well, this was after Belvedere. So they had, it wasn't just what they thought, they had proof that this division was a pretty good outfit. One of the things that was impressive is that, of course, General Hayes eventually knew what I knew because I was there while that spring offensive was being planned. That's what I'm saying, I don't mean to pinpoint my importance to the situation. So the idea was that I knew it. Then, of course, I could see where the division was going to be employed. The division was employed, transportation is important for supply reasons, all kinds, food, ammunition, wounded, bandages, the whole bit. Armor, the whole bit. So you got to use roads. You can't be transporting heavy armor up some of these roads in the mountains. They aren't substantial enough, and so on. So in order to use the full weight of firepower in military action, you've got to command the heights. So we were given, let's say, a path. A zone had to be commanding the heights that surveyed the roads network. So that's what was done. So, it's very simple when you see it, but sometimes people ignore it. And they must have ignored it because they tried to use armor capturing Belvedere. Didn't work, and, So the idea being you've got to command the heights so that the heavy stuff can come up the roads.
Think back to the March offensive and tell me, what were the big disadvantages for the 10th Mountain Division during the March offensive? They no longer are attacking at night, so what are the disadvantages that they've got?
Well, clearing minefields, fortified positions, and the linkage between those, up against fields of fire that had already been planned. I'm using terms here, are you familiar with them? You know, when you establish a defense as part of your military training, you'll pinpoint areas of possible use by the military, the enemy attacking your position, and you establish fields of fire. And you always try to get the guy in an enfilade position, which means you may let him come in a little bit and then you catch him from the flanks because his troops are lined up like that and you can take them all out, you know. So the point I'm making is that this is what we were up against because other militaries do the same thing. So you're working uphill and you're working through minefields on the way up and you're working from dugout positions up there. They're a dugout for protection from bombs, you know, covered dugouts. And your fields of fire have been surveyed by them, sweeping the area. So that's what G.I. Joe is up against.
Was the March offensive costly in terms of human lives?
Yep. And it was probably the heaviest losses during the period, during the months we were over there. Well, probably, I know it was.
Let's talk a little bit about the April offensive and how the 86th faced Rocca Rufino.
Oh boy, I don't know if I can remember that.
After you jumped off of Dulles Bay,
Yeah, I know, yeah.
the 86 split to go around Rocca Rufino.
God, I don't know if I can remember that.
How about this?
I've lost some of my memory. I find because you know I mentioned some of these things when the chapter meetings, just talking way back. The deals that I remember at this time, in my life is the Poe, and also that tunnel number 6.
Well, let's move
I
on
was
to
up in there and so forth. There was plenty of action, as you point out, you know, in the early days of April in there. You know, Rufino and so on, yeah.
That's okay.
It was, yeah.
Well, let's move on to Garda. Tell me what you recall about tunnel number 6.
Well, first place, I traveled on the tour, and not at that time in Italy when I was there during the war. But I traveled on one of the tours up the other side of the lake from the tunnels. There were tunnels over there. And the tunnels over there, the ground was different over there. There were tunnels, there were certain areas that these cliffs had come down and they had the tunnel through them, like on the east side of the lake where we were, but fewer of them. It was less precipitous. And of course, they had manufactured stuff in there. You could still see some of the manufacturing machinery that they were manufacturing things like clothing, bandages, and so forth in those tunnels, protection. On the east side of the lake, there were more tunnels. And all the machinery and so forth had been removed. And most of them had been mined. The general at that time was using a leapfrogging system of troops with trucks. And those would be relieved and so on. So the advance was pretty rapid, but of course you had to clear those tunnels first. Well, Tunnel 6 was tough because at that time the other side of the lake hadn't been cleared, even though the one battalion of one company of the 85th had been sent over there to clear it. There was still some 88s on that side over there in those tunnels. Well, they'd zeroed in across the lake on these tunnels. And the 88th was the most effective artillery piece that anybody ever had in World War II anyway. It was a flat shooting gun, high velocity. You could say it like a rifle. So, you know, putting guys in the tunnels, man, oh man, when those shell burst, of course, those fragments ricocheted off those granite walls. It was just mayhem. But I remember very well being there, and let's see, General Irvin, I was along with him on this trip, and he was a SG3. And at one end of the tunnel, we just started to get into the tunnel, and this was the farthest advance that the division was at the point in that tunnel, number 6, I think it was. And the shell came in on the other end and killed a lot of guys immediately. And I remember that very well. What happened was on some of these tunnels, they'd use the ducks, to circumvent the tunnels, bypass them, in other words, on the water of the lake, rather than they'd all been mined heavily, and sometimes with the German troops remaining, they tripped their own mines. I could tell you stories about things that now would be considered torture, that would make your hair stand on end. Philosophically, every generation goes through certain kind of experiences. And the war experiences are unique, obviously. Unique because you hope you're not a part of them. They're unique because they do happen, but not necessarily every 5 minutes. But people don't understand about war. War is, you get shot, you get killed, or that guy gets killed. What's it going to be? You don't get out a book that's called the Geneva Convention and say, now let's say under this condition, what would I do? And this guy that you are about to kill just shot your buddy. So are you going to take him prisoner, or are you going to kill him? And if you don't kill him, are you going to torture him to get information out of him about some other guys that can kill you that are up on the mountain there? Yes. But we have so much legislation today. People are torturing. Jesus, I have to think, let some of these boys get over there in the uniform and get shot at, see their buddies killed while you're in the same foxhole with you, and then talk to them about torture. See what you think of torture now. Yeah.
What's your feeling about luck? How much luck? I'm going to have you lean on this arm instead. Yeah, there you go. What's your feeling about luck, and how much luck plays into if it's your buddy that gets it in the foxhole, or if it's you?
Well, I don't think there's any better definition than that. Luck. Good fortune, luck. It's about all it is. And the artillery barrages which have occurred in World War II are vicious. There's nothing like it. And to be in a foxhole and come out of still alive after if you receive some of those, why, it's luck.
Do you think the Germans had superior artillery capabilities?
They had the best gun, best artillery piece, the 88. Well, it's tough to say best, good, better, or best. They were good. The worst, though, even better than in the way the Russians employed artillery, which was massing artillery, unheard of massing, 5,000 artillery pieces lined up hub to hub, in some of those deals, and what the Germans experienced as a result of those artillery barrages the Russians put on, it's a damn wonder that any of them ever lived. Willie Schaeffler, who was here, teaching skiing he was a friend of Larry Jump up in Arapahoe Basin, but also was a coach for a while of the DU ski team when they were national champs. Was on the Russian front in the German army. He came out alive, but boy, the stories he can tell would make your hair curl. Anyway, continue on. The division, of course, was over there patrolling the Yugoslav border and so
I'm gonna
on.
tilt you a little bit this way. Yeah, there we go. Lean on this, yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And at that time, they were under the command of the British Army over there, and then of course we were called back to the States. Have you heard the story about the champagne?
No, go ahead and tell me.
General Hayes, in first place, we were fortunate. In my personal view, the division was very lucky to have a division commander with the knowledge that General Hayes had. Knowledge of World War I. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, which, by the way, was the only ribbon he ever wore. And his experience, he had experience, a little bit, well, he had a lot in World War II, landing the second day at Omaha Beach in the European theater and in Normandy. And then for a period he commanded the artillery of the 34th Division for a short period of time in Italy when they were trying to take Cassino. So he understood about the importance of taking heights. Well, the general was a great guy in this sense. Work hard and play hard. Very direct, understood use of the infantry, the proper use, and valued each and every man. He sent his aide up to look around up in the German redoubt at the time the Germans surrendered in Italy, May 2nd. And the general aide discovered some warehouses up in Merano, which is in northern Italy. And there were warehouses with a lot of art, leather goods that you wouldn't believe, beautiful leather goods. Italians are great on leather goods. And around Florence is a good place to pick them up anyway. And he also discovered warehouses full of champagne. The general sent up trucks to pick it up. There were 54 2.5-ton trucks filled with champagne the general brought back to the division. He issued champagne to every company in the division. And of course, Corps headquarters heard about the champagne, so he had to send back to Corps headquarters. He had to send some back to Army headquarters. And he told every commander that you're welcome to have parties as long as you have a military policeman in each party and that you drink the champagne at the party, no taking the champagne elsewhere, which of course everybody enjoyed. The general also arranged that at the time we were on the Yugoslav frontier, he would give passes, arrange for passes to be given any enlisted man that he wanted a tour into Austria and places in Switzerland where other commands, he had to arrange this with other commands, in the theater. And he would provide transportation for them, like jeeps, for them to look around Italy while they were there. So he was quite a guy overall. Yeah.
He took good care of you guys. you were his best resources.
Well, yes. We missed the boys that were killed, but it would have been much worse if we didn't have a commander like Hayes.
What was it about him that made him so special?
Well, I'm going to say something now that maybe is a personal feeling. General Hayes was not a West Pointer. He came up through the ranks, although by that I mean he became an officer in the University of Oklahoma, the Reserve Officers Training Program there, and stayed in the military. General Hayes, was the son of a minister. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. He was born in China. So to get on with, why was he such a commander and such a great person? His experience in World War I, seeing the damage done to infantry troops subjected to bombardment when they didn't move, just cowered and dug holes and they just didn't move. He saw the damage, knew the utmost importance of communication. And since France wasn't mountainous in the area he operated in during World War I, but he recognized the problems with communication in the mountains. So his knowledge obtained basically from his military experience